Hello, and welcome to Thinking Boldly. This is the podcast series for the Consilium Institute. I'm retired Judge Julie Field, and I am here with my partner and the co-founder of Consilium Institute, Heidi Webb. And we are very honored and excited today to have as our guests Lindsay Reilly and David Vandenberg, who are early Consilium adopters and have had a sort of a different journey than a lot of folks into the realm of family law. So we're really excited to talk with you about that today and just to kind of find out more about both of you and your practice and what you do for fun and all the things. So welcome.
Thank you. We're so glad to be
Thank you very
here.
much. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So let me do a little bit more complete introduction. David Vandenberg and Lindsay Reilly are in practice together, but they have been colleagues and friends since meeting in law school at the University of Colorado. Both Dave and Lindsay spent over a decade working at the Larimer County District Attorney's Office as assistant district attorneys. And during that time, Dave managed the appeals for the office, arguing before both the Colorado Court of Appeals and the Colorado Supreme Court. He later oversaw the Special Victims Unit as a chief deputy and then rose to the position of assistant district attorney, second in command of the office as a whole. Lindsay focused her work as a district attorney on prosecuting domestic violence cases and later drug trafficking. She was promoted to chief deputy district attorney before leaving the office. Along with another former district attorney, Dave and Lindsay started their own firm about 4 years ago. They practice in a number of areas of civil litigation, including domestic relations. And while they have the experience and knowledge to excel in the courtroom, their hope is really to reach resolutions outside of the courtroom that contemplate long-term solutions and a holistic approach to restructuring families. So a perfect fit for Consilium. I'm going to add to that more formal introduction, my personal introduction of these two, because I had the privilege of presiding over a criminal docket as well as a family court docket and civil docket. I did everything on the bench. And so I got to see Lindsay and Dave in their work as district attorneys, as assistant district attorneys. And Lindsay was my courtroom deputy for several years before she went on to do the drug trafficking cases, the major drug cases in our community. And Dave, I had the privilege of working with on his appellate work. So two brilliant minds that I have known for many years and seen their work for many years. And I'm just was so excited when you guys went into private practice with the breadth of experience that you have in the courtroom and the knowledge base that you have for how to deal with people who are in challenging situations, having worked with the victims in the DA's office and really bringing that to the work that you do. So I'm just really, really thrilled to have you as part of Consilium, but also to have seen your journey as professionals and the growth that you've had over the past few years.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you, Julie. We're sure excited to have Consilium as we continue in our careers on this journey.
Absolutely.
And I'm just the lucky beneficiary of my life.
So being district attorneys and then transitioning to family law. I mean, first of all, why? Because it doesn't seem like it's the most natural fit. And the second part of that question is what benefit, if any, do you see from being DAs and transferring that to the civil practice and the family law practice that you have now?
I think I'll take the first stab at it, Lindsay, if that's all right. I think
Absolutely.
on the why, I think it's fair to say both Lindsay and I leaving the DA's office and not doing that any longer was probably not our first choice. I think we both envisioned ourselves as career prosecutors, but circumstances came up. Then it was clear we were not gonna be DAs for very much longer, and so we got together and decided we were gonna make a go of it, hang a shingle together. I think the idea of either of us doing it as solo sounded awful. It still sounds awful, and so I'm certainly glad to have had her on that journey. But I think probably like a lot of people, when we got out of doing the one thing in law that we knew how to do, which is criminal law, we were really insulated in that way. There was the whole broad world, whole broad legal world out there that we had almost no contact with or experience with, and we certainly at the beginning had to some extent, sort of take whatever came in the door. We knew we had a couple of people that were a couple of colleagues that had transitioned specifically from the DA's office to family law, and we leaned on them a little bit to just kind of get a sense of what that would be. And I think the idea, even before we kind of fully committed to focusing on it among the few areas that we have focused on, um, was the idea that it is a way where you can as opposed to like a civil case about money damages or things like that, is a way where you can directly be involved in people's lives and help them. And we thought our perspective of trying to not get bogged down in fights that didn't need to be had, but to try and keep the big picture in mind and try and keep long-term outcomes in mind. One was something that we thought we could bring to the table, and that was also something that when Consilium came along and Julie explained it to us, um, it seemed to resonate really well with us because it was sort of consistent with what we hoped to be able to uh, the perspective we hope to help bring to people who were going to be, in theory, going through a divorce or even a post-divorce family law matter. Just try and bring that all kind of different perspective than just maybe trying getting dragged down into a fight and asking the question of, is this something that we really need to be fighting about, or that would even benefit you, client, to be fighting?
I agree. I think a lot of the time when people shy away from family law or express, distaste for it or criminal, one of the reasons is just it's so emotional a lot of the time, and it's so deeply personal. I mean, that's the case with family law, I think, pretty much all the time. Even, divorces that are low conflict, this is no one's plan, right? And I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of walking people through journeys they never thought that they'd be on. No one gets married expecting to be divorced. No one expects to be a victim of a crime. Um, and I think we are meeting people during one of the most difficult times in their lives in either situation. Um, but I think being able to help being able to make that really difficult situation less difficult and walk with people through that has been really rewarding. And I think it was kind of a natural transition from helping victims in criminal cases to working with folks in domestic relations and divorce cases for that reason. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about it is making the transition from, as the district attorney, we were in charge, right? We navigated the case and victims gave input, but we were the deciders. And it's been so great to flip that and have clients who are the deciders, and we are just advocating for them and empowering them. That's something that I've really enjoyed about domestic relations that when we first started, it hadn't occurred to me that there would be that distinction. But it's really nice, instead of, swooping in and being the superhero, to help people be their own superheroes through difficult times.
No, I love the way that you're sort of seeing the comparisons. I mean, I think both often, not always, but many times, people are both sort of in a victimless crime sort of situation that has a lot of trauma associated with it. Um, and, I think it's not a necessarily obvious logical leap from criminal law to family law. But the way you've described it and what you sort of get from it, I'm sure people feel your compassion, feels the fact that you know, understand how wounded they are and how
Mhm.
difficult this is. And I think that's huge. And I think it's a, you know, for an attorney to be able to be with someone in that time of pain is not a usual occurrence. I think many, by virtue of what legal training is for many people, I mean, they distance themselves from clients, from individuals, and it's hard for them to sort of be in relationship and not see a divorce as a transactional sort of event when really it's like the essence of what someone's living through.
Mhm.
So I love that you're, you know, naturally sort of merging those identities.
Yeah, and as you talk about, going from the DAs being in charge of really of the outcome, right, to in family law cases, the clients being in charge of their decisions. Um, Many times those clients don't feel like they're in charge of their decisions,
Mhm.
right? So, do you see that? And if so, how do you help them recognize the power that they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a couple reasons for that. I think sometimes it's genuinely not understanding the process, and it's a confusing process, and we deal with it so frequently that sometimes I'll find myself speaking in shorthand or just assuming they understand. Um, and I think sometimes when I have clients that express that helplessness to me, it comes from a place of not totally understanding the options. Sometimes clients express not feeling like they have options, and really what they're getting at is not liking the options, and that's a different problem, and that's tricky. um but sometimes when people struggle with the way that the system is set up, um there isn't as much that we can do with that now. If after all this is over they want to advocate for a different system, fabulous. um, but I do think a lot of empowering clients is understanding that they might just need some more time with the options. And just because I explained it to them at one point doesn't mean that they remember, especially, again, going through a time of trauma, right? I have clients that I find I'll need to repeat some things multiple times. And it's not because they weren't paying attention, it's not because they're unintelligent. It's really what they're capable of holding on to at a particular time while still dealing with the emotional side of this, right? And that's what's really sticking out, not what's a marital asset and what's a separate asset, and what does parenting time mean, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for so many people, I mean, you even start talking marital asset and non-marital asset, and all they think is like flashing red lights. You know, it's like
Mhm.
they're not even hearing the words.
Right.
So, you know, it's really easy for, you know, I think someone who becomes accustomed to the world and the language to just sort of, it rolls off your tongue. Um, and to sort of pause and ask and, you know, um, and I think a lot of people are intimidated to even ask the question. You know, so if you
Right.
don't provide the space and say, "Does this make sense to you or not?" Because, you know, I get that it may not. Um, yes. Yeah.
And it's
Dave?
interesting often when I try and tell people kind of even at the beginning when we're establishing our relationship that, hey, I'm here to walk this path with you, but it's your path and ultimately you are my boss. And so I my job is to navigate this with you, tell you, what options are, but it's up to you and obviously give you advice and give you recommendations based on, pros, cons of the different choices you might make, but that it is ultimately you that makes the decision. And people will often say, great, I'm on board with that. And they kind of accept that that gives them some agency in the situation. But honestly, other people will say, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's why I'm hiring you. I want you to make those decisions and you tell me what to
I
do.
don't wanna be
I
responsible for
don't want that.
them. Right.
Which is fine. I mean, it's fine. And that's just, uh, I think it's one of those things that I log it away and I say, all right, well, I'm just going to have to continue to work on you that and make you understand that when we make these decisions, they are your decisions and not mine.
Right.
But it's interesting because it just helps set the dynamic of kind of when I talk to you and when we discuss things, what are you hearing, and what tack should I take in that conversation?
Yeah, and I think it's so well said. I think that people's expectations also play a big part in it, and if they haven't had a voice in their marriage, or it's been a really
Mhm.
quiet voice in their marriage, it's really hard to sort of sit when you're almost in the position of sort of, well, at least someone who they're in relationship with, and they're used to being, sort of ostracized from themselves in a sense. It's really hard when you say, now you take the reins, now you drive, and they're like, wait, wait, wait. No, like, I'm not ready for that, and I don't maybe even want to be responsible. Um, so I think it's of course a lot easier to blame people when things go badly if you don't take responsibility.
Mhm.
So, to get buy-in, I think is really, like, I love that you say, you're walking this path with them and you're sort of going to keep doing that. Like, I'll keep checking in with you. I'll make sure we're sort of on this path together
Mhm.
is really huge.
Mhm.
Yeah, love that.
What do each of you bring to the work that you do, right? Because I know Dave had more appellate experience and, research and writing, and Lindsay, and at least my observation of her, based on my experience with her, more courtroom experience, right? And you both dealt with that, but in complex cases. But how, if someone comes to your office, what's their experience with this team?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's funny because Dave and I are very different people, but we are so in sync in the way that we practice law. We joke about sharing brains. When it comes to, big picture, how do we approach this? What's the right thing? Strategy will have different ideas, but really at the end of the day, what should we be doing? We are on the same page 98% of the time without conversation. And the other 2%, we talk about it and go, oh, you're right, and come to an agreement. I mean, look, I wasn't on the law review. I was smart enough to partner with the guy on the law review. And, and I think I can do legal research and I can get by. Dave is brilliant with that. Dave knows the law off the top of his head in a way that he won't brag about, but I'll brag about because, again, you know, I was the one that got him to be my law partner. Um, I think, we both are really good with relationships. And I think that's a lot of really what this comes down to is knowing the law, being able to apply the law, but then also being able to convey that to people. We do joke that I'm more the feelings person. Like if there's a case that's real big on feelings, um, I that tends to be kind of more my area, especially cases that have blown up. I'm the second lawyer on probably more than half of my cases. Um, for whatever reason. But we also collaborate. I mean, we spend
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. For anybody listening, just when you say second lawyer, because you're talking about your office, you don't mean in the office. You mean someone's
Mm.
had a lawyer.
Oh,
I
great
mean,
clarification. Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, so someone's had a lawyer, and for whatever reason, it wasn't a fit. It always makes me nervous. Every single time it makes me nervous. And sometimes it's because people they don't like what the law is. They don't like the honest feedback they're getting. That's not a good reason. And those aren't cases that I take. But I think a lot of the time there's just something that's missing in terms of, uh, honestly, more than half the time, it's just communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is that simple. It is making sure they know what's going on, when it's going on. They understand the process. And that's a lot of what I do. But we spend a lot of the time working on cases, collaborating. Hey, this came up. What do you think? How do I talk down opposing counsel on this issue? How far is too far when we get to the point where we're just going to litigate this? So it really is. If you hire one or the other of us, I guarantee you, the other one knows about the case, is familiar with it, and is involved. So if you met either of us on the street, we're very, very different people, but we're really not. I mean, we have the same
Mm-hmm.
core values that we bring to these cases. And yeah, we are. We're very much aligned.
Yeah.
Right. But I do think, to echo what Lindsay said, I do think, like, from a practical perspective, if you called the office and you said, hey, I've got a DR case or I have a would-be DR case, I mean, the first thing we'd figure out is just kind of who has time for it or room for it at that point. But then also just to suss out the dynamics of what's at play here. And if it is truly a really high, I don't know if feelings is the right word, but if, maybe a significant conflict where the person is just going to need to talk over the same thing 5 or 6 times, and have the basic same conversation 5 or 6 times, that's definitely more of a strength of Lindsay's than it is for me. And I will say to her point that, because it just goes to communication, and she's excellent at it. I try to be decent, but I'm not nearly in her stratosphere. And when she says that a lot of the reason she's the second attorney is because the issues from clients of communication, I can take this opportunity to brag on her a little bit and say that in each of those instances, she's always the last attorney as well. There's not been other attorneys after her in any of those circumstances.
Nice point.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. I mean, I think communication, just like in a marriage, it's like people often will ask me, after you've done this for so long, what's the biggest reason people get divorced? And I will say it's communication. It always comes down to communication. I mean, you can say it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's sex. I mean, you can say all sorts of circumstances, but the essential piece is people stop communicating. And I think in relationships, whether it's lawyer-client, husband-wife, parent-child, I mean, it's always like, how are people communicating? And, are people delivering a message or people receiving a message?
Right. Right. And how are things perceived? Right. And that absolutely continues into the divorce.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I think divorces sort of mimic marriages in many ways.
Mhm.
It's the same issues seem to.
And it's interesting, like it that kind of speaks to one of the common things that we find ourselves telling clients when they come in and they're very frustrated. Sometimes they're frustrated at the options that they have. Sometimes they're frustrated at a position that the other party is taking. And what we have to continually tell them is one of the things we can't control is the other side. And we, as much as you might want, as much as you were very frustrated with them, or else we obviously wouldn't be in the situation. But one of the things we can't do throughout this process is change who they are. We can only change what we do, like how we process those feelings and how we let it affect us. But we can't stop the other side from being difficult if they've been difficult throughout the marriage, and that's kind of why you're here. It's not going to change at this point, and they're unlikely to have a complete personality shift in the middle of a divorce to the point where all of a sudden they're like, oh, you know what? You were right about everything. And I agree with everything you're saying now. And the things that you're asking for, I'll do all of them. Like it's not going to happen. It's not realistic. And I think just, again, that's just one of the steps in processing a lot of those emotions that go along with it, but having to have those conversations of, yeah, that's one of the things we sure can't control is that the other side's probably not going to change. And as frustrating as it may be that they're not seeing it, or like, how can they do this when they know how, it will affect the children, for example, or something like that. Those are tough conversations, and ones that happen frequently and repeatedly
Yeah.
with clients, but it's, that's a tough dynamic to navigate.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, hopefully it can sometimes, it's difficult, but sometimes be an opportunity to reframe those same things and say, we know that this is never going to happen. So how are you going to redefine that in your life? Like, that's the agency part. It seems to me, when you can say to somebody, we know that didn't work. And like you just said so artfully, Dave, it's not going to change. But what can change is where you put that in your own life and your own perspective. So how do you put parameters around that you can find more acceptable? Because otherwise
Absolutely.
you're just banging your head against a wall.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that leads into one of the first conversations we have in taking cases, which is, are you in therapy? Because I'm not afraid to have that conversation some with clients. You can't just ignore the stuff that you can't control. You can't ignore some of the stuff that would be addressed in therapy when you're talking to a client as a divorce lawyer. But I'm not a mental health professional, right? And they need to have a team around them, which is something that Consilium reinforces, which I think is so true. We shouldn't be the one-stop shop for everything, right? Just like, we get too far into taxes and I'm like, I am not your gal. I'm familiar with the concept of taxes, but yeah, I didn't go to law school because I'm so good with math. But also with, some of these frustrations around, my husband continues to do X or my wife, won't stop talking about Y. Absolutely. These are things they clients need to be, I think if you're going through a divorce, you absolutely need to be in some sort of mental health treatment. And I can tell the difference between my clients who are and who aren't. Once clients start going, you notice a difference. Having that support, I think, is so huge.
And I think to piggyback on that too, and specifically for the reason that you're not that person, they have somebody else to talk to. So when they come to you, they've not put all their eggs in the basket of the conversation you're about to have. And so you could talk to them about lawyer things, and get hopefully, that part of their brain where you could talk through things in a way that makes common sense and is logical, and they, since they have somebody to be their counselor as opposed to an attorney who's also a counselor at law, but they actually have another counselor, the less of that piece that they are expecting from us, I find that the better our communication tends to be on the matters that we have actually within our control.
Absolutely.
Sort of like going to the right well for the right drink.
Exactly right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like you really build your team within your firm, but also expand that team outside the firm for clients.
Yes, absolutely. And we have names available. And I think that's important too. Depending on the client and what their needs are, I can give them names of different therapists I know in town who are good at dealing with particular issues. We know, um, you know, um, financial planners, all different sorts of things. Because again, we are not experts in everything and we know enough to know we don't know everything.
Right. Which is part of, hopefully as Consilium grows and as the Tapestry grows, and I think it's in your community is growing, you're able to integrate those people and speak the same language. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity, but I'm curious to bring any other people who are also Consilium members into work that you're doing, either therapists, financials, or other attorneys where you've had Consilium people.
I've had occasion. I was actually just going to mention too, and it was only through Consilium. Otherwise, I would not have known this person. To refer some folks that need help. So hey, we think of the terms of a separation agreement worked out, and my client then is going to have to figure out whether they can refinance and afford to keep their real property, or they're going to have to sell it within the next 90 days, and to have a name to be able to send that person to that can have that conversation with them and at least put them on one of two paths, hopefully in pretty short order, is something I found through Consilium. I've referred several people to, I don't know if we're allowed to use names here, but for Joe Woodman, several people over to him for help with specifically those questions, and have been able to tell him this is a person who understands
Great. Yeah, that's
specifically the mortgage options available to people who are in your exact shoes. And should be able to point you in at least not, if not point you in a direction, give you options of what is realistic for you in a pretty short amount of time. And it would,
I mean, in my estimation, it's like that's not that can't say it should be part of your job, but I sort of feel it should be part of your job. That a lot of lawyers see their job, family law lawyers see their job as getting someone divorced, like literally, like here's the judgment. And that feels very incomplete to me. Like what you're doing, saying, talk to Joe Woodman. I mean, he's a mortgage broker who can really sort of help you understand the lay of the land and everything that you need to do. And that's not what I do. But building sort of the scaffolding for somebody, as well as just giving them like the legal judgment, which is, for most people, not something that they ever went looking for in particular, but wanted to sort of rebuild their world. And what does that mean to them? And what Lindsay's saying about therapists and what you're saying about mortgage brokers, there are lots of ways people need to rebuild after a rupture as big as a divorce. And I love how you're doing it. It's great.
So who
That's
is
my goals.
so who is your ideal client?
Oh, wow. I mean, the lazy side of me would say somebody who has no children and has a very brief.
Sure.
um,
But we know you're not lazy.
but, man, that's what a great question. What a curveball. I would say somebody. I mean, somebody who I feel when I give them advice, even if they ultimately make their own decision because they're the boss, like we talked about at the beginning, but someone who will, who I feel will, hear what I'm saying, kind of is able to talk through things with me in a way that I can see that they're actually getting it, and who is approaching it in a way of saying, I similar to what I kind of similar to my own philosophy that I guess it helps me identify with them, of saying, hey, I'm not here to make the other side miserable. I'm not here to fight about things that don't need to be fight about, nor do I want to pay you to fight about things that are not consequential. I want to figure out what's important, um, you know, make the decisions we need to make, and try and get this done as amicably, which usually means quickly, if those two things are able to align, as possible. So I think that's just in very kind of 10,000-foot view terms. That's probably who a client that I would most identify with.
Yeah. I think that's a really good answer. If they have children, that's great. A lot of my cases involve kids. It needs to be someone who, when they are their best self, is putting their kids first. When they are their best self, there are going to be those moments, just like all of us, where they maybe need to be reminded. Um, and I think someone who hopefully can be in a position to focus on what they can control and to really look forward. But I think that is something that Consilium is so unique in, which blows my mind. It blows my mind that it's revolutionary to say that divorce should be forward thinking, right? Um, because so much of it, I mean, look, how do you want to set up the finances? Well, what do you want to be doing in the future? Who's going to have the house? Well, do you want to live there? Um, these are things that people really don't think to ask, and a lot of lawyers don't ask. It's about getting as much as you can, making the other side feel whatever it is, which, I mean, talk about a fool's errand, right? Um, but if you can get a client, and this is not a day one situation, right? They don't come in day one saying, hi, I'm going to get a divorce, and in 5 years, here's where I want to be, right? But helping them in that direction, those are clients where I really feel like I can do my best work. When we can go on that path. And what does co-parenting look like, right?
Mhm.
Speaking of the future, because you're not going to stay married. So talk to me about that person's strengths. Talk to me about how we can play those up. And how can we set your family up for success? Those are the cases where I really walk away thinking they're never going to need a lawyer again, right? They've got these orders. It didn't turn out the way they wanted. They're divorced. But I feel good that they're on a long-term path, that we helped get them there.
Yeah. I love how you both express that, because I think what the through line that I hear is that you're not top-down lawyering. You're not telling people what to do, what the outcome should be, or being a director of their show. but you're really, you're in relationship with them and you're really helping them create their option B. It's like, we acknowledge this wasn't first choice, but here we go. Like, how are we going to do this as best as we can? And yeah.
So geographically, what areas do you serve? What counties? Is it just Larimer County,
We
Northern?
work in Weld County as well, but those are the two at this point.
Right.
Do you think about expanding at all, or you just want to keep it close?
I don't think so, because I feel comfortable advising clients about just about any judicial officer in those two areas. If we moved beyond that, I think we would be moving beyond our expertise, and I really want to be able to offer the best legal advice we possibly can. So I think probably not. And frankly, we're plenty busy in those two counties.
That's where I was going to go. I would say, yeah, if we were starving for work, which we are very fortunate not to be in the moment, I think we would maybe look to going, like, expanding maybe to Boulder, but not probably beyond that. But we're very blessed right now to not have to worry about them. So
Lovely.
So one other thing I would add when I was asking about, what can people expect when they come to your office is that you have a very dog-friendly office.
We
So
do.
tell us about that. Tell us about your dog companions that come to work with you every day.
sure, they I'm not sure either of
You
them were
don't sound very
founding.
excited, David.
I'm not sure either of them were founding members, but they were darn close.
No, we weren't.
They were
No.
both darn close. So we both have doodles. So mine is named Lucy. Lucy, come here. Mine's named Lucy, and Lindsay's is Avogadro. She's 4 years old. Oh, there she comes. And
Yeah, we want to meet them both.
let's see.
No. Oh,
I should go get Barbie. I feel like she's going to be left out. Hold on. I'll be right.
no, there's no off.
There.
Here's Lucy. Lucy the golden doodle. So she's about
Wow.
4 years old. She's mine.
Oh, adorable.
So-
She looks very golden.
Here's
Yeah,
Apple.
Lucy, say hi.
Hi, Avo.
Oh my goodness.
So good to
Oh,
see you
wait,
both.
Yeah.
should I go get the notorious RBG?
I'm sorry.
Is that?
I have one too.
Oh, right.
She's a doodle also.
Oh, yeah. They're great. Well, they're naughty. Mostly Avo will, when people come to the office, he'll bark, but then they really are, they're
empaths.
casually speaking, they're therapy dogs. They're definitely, I think when people are struggling, they gravitate toward folks and demand pets, but for the benefit of the petter, of course. Right?
Of course. I feel like they pick up that energy.
Yeah,
They're
they're here
really
with us pretty much every day, and the clients do, by and large, but I think maybe one exception that I know of, really appreciate having them here. So.
Yeah, I do think it's generally been a positive. It makes things a little more casual. It makes things a little more warm, and I think that there's a benefit to folks in having that, and it's a little relaxing.
It sort of goes back to also when you said, something, I'm not going to get your words exactly right, but you said, when someone's their best self, talking about their kids, when we're all of ourselves, I think it matters. And I think your dogs are part of your humanity. It's part of sort of like what makes you more of a full, relatable person. And, I think someone pointed out to me a long time ago, I was writing something about a client, and they said, I'm not a client, I'm a person. And I thought it was a really important distinction because, it's easy for us to talk about clients, but it's a differentiator. And when we talk about, people, it changes our mindset about, how we're framing what we're doing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I want to just also wrap up just to take a point that Heidi just said. And one of the first conversations that I had with Lindsay and Dave, and I was really happy to have so many conversations with you both when you were first starting your practice after leaving the DA's office, is you said that you didn't want cases, you wanted people. You wanted to help people. It wasn't about the case. And you really steered the way that you were thinking about your work towards people, not number of cases, not right. That it was very, very foundational and human centered. And that actually is everything that I think you're sharing and shared with us today, is how people centered and client centered you are in the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's apparent just talking with you. It's just like the ease that you sort of navigate this difficult terrain is really with so much grace. And I think that's really apparent just in our conversation today. So I'm really grateful to have had it with you.
Thank you. We certainly try. It's not not always smooth sailing, but it helps keep grounded when you can just kind of come back to
That's real.
I've got a person who happens to be a client, and I'm trying to help
Right.
them in a tough spot. So
Right.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I think, Heidi talking about I'm not a client, I'm a person is another one of the things that I think is so important about Consilium. Words matter and they have meaning. And Consilium is very much about using words deliberately. Um, Clients pick up on those. Especially when they're in those places. And, I don't mean to be dismissive when I say, big feelings. These are hugely emotional, traumatic events. Divorce is traumatic. I think for anyone going through it, find the most amicable divorce. It's still a divorce. You're still ending a marriage. And clients hear those words and it really shapes how they view what's going on. And being deliberate and mindful about that, I do think makes a difference in the experiences that people have.
Huge. Yeah, I think it enormously. Couldn't agree more.
All right. One last point, and that is that we asked you to share some different thoughts about, different favorite quotes, favorite, movies. I know, Lindsay, your favorite holiday, I know, is Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day.
Good reason.
Hands down. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It hasn't been commercialized yet.
Right. Which is why it's a favorite.
Exactly. Still
Right.
pure.
Right. And one of the quotes that you gave us, and I wasn't sure who gave this to us, whether it was Lindsay or Dave or both, but it was the Teddy Roosevelt "Daring Greatly"
Oh,
quote.
yeah.
And I'll just read a little bit of it, but it goes, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the one who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings, but who actually strives to do the deeds, who at worst, if they fail, at least fails while daring greatly." So it seems to me, I love that you shared that perspective and would love to hear you just talk for a minute about it if you would like. But that's what you've done, right? That's what you have done in leaving the DA's office and starting your own firm. And you are daring greatly in this new world. And I'm just so excited for all that you've accomplished so far in your 4 years in practice, and will continue to for your clients, for the people who are not cases, but are people who happen to be clients. So, daring greatly, what does that is that what that means to you? That's the context that I read it in, looking at you both professionally, but I'm sure there's other meanings as well.
Yeah. I came to know that quote from reading Brene Brown. Um, and I think, like many lawyers, and I think Dave falls into this category. We're very much perfectionists, and so a lot of what comes with that is not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to try things without knowing the outcome. Um, but I think what I love about that quote is the importance of trying things without knowing the outcome, and doing our best. Um, to try to, in this context, right, to help these folks through these situations. And we can give them the best advice we possibly can, right, provide them with all the resources. At the end of the day, I don't know what's going to happen to these folks and these families that we're helping. Um, but we're sure as heck going to try and, get in the arena, and at worst, if we fail daring greatly. It's such a hard message, and it's one that I have to remind myself of over and over. Um,
Hmm.
but I think it's what we're striving to do.
Love it.
Well said.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. There you go, finishing each other's sentences again.
Makes me laugh.
So, yep. David Vandenberg, Lindsay Reilly are amazing, amazing attorneys here in Northern Colorado. So, helping families, helping clients, doing what they can to dare greatly for themselves and on behalf of their clients. So, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, absolutely. Our pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you,
It's been
Julie. Thank you, Heidi.
absolutely-
Really appreciate the time.
Oh, it was fabulous. Thank you both so much.
Yeah.